If you work in quality control at a candy factory, you know strict safety regulations come with the job. It's why you partner with Grainger. Grainger helps you find the high-quality and compliant products your business needs to inspect, detect, and help correct issues. And the sweetest part is, everyone gets a product that's as safe to eat as it is delicious. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
What's up, everybody? So today I wanted to do a full presentation on David Ferrie, the Grassy Knoll, and the Winterland Ice Arena. Because it seems as though nobody else has figured out that David Ferrie was in Dallas. David Ferrie was on the Knoll. David Ferrie never went to the Winterland. And that wasn't really very difficult to show and to demonstrate. But for some reason, no one else has been able to figure it out. So today we're going to go through the entirety of the information that we have on David Ferrie and his activities on the day of the assassination and the subsequent days. So, let us begin. We'll start off with some basic FBI reports on what the official story is, okay? Subsequent investigation by New Orleans office disclosed information was received by Orleans Parish District Attorney's Office, New Orleans, November 24 last, that one David William Ferrie allegedly taught Lee Harvey Oswald the use of a telescopic sight on a rifle. DA's office concluded Ferrie possibly involved in assassination of president and conducted investigation to locate Ferrie. Ferrie was absent from his residence when investigators showed up. Next page, assassination of President John F. Kennedy, November 22, 1963, Dallas, Texas. Telephone calls November 25 last to Supervisor Richard Gallagher from New Orleans, David William Ferrie. During the morning of November 25, press inquiry received by New Orleans office concerning arrest of Leighton Patrick Martins and Alvin Roland Beaubouf, arrested early morning, November 25, by New Orleans PD on vagrancy charge, with notation in arrest book that they were being held for Secret Service and FBI. FBI stated that from October 11th to October 18th, 1963, he was in Guatemala, and again from October 30th, 1963 to November 1st, 63, he was in Guatemala, in connection with the investigation of the Marcello case. Ferrie said that prior to a very recent trip, he was last in the state of Texas in August 1962, at which time he was in Orange, Texas. Ferrie said that he had planned during the trial of the Marcello case that immediately upon the conclusion of that case, he would take a trip for the purpose of relaxing. He said that he left his home at 3330 Louisiana Avenue Parkway, New Orleans on November 22nd, 63, roughly at 6:30 p.m., in his 1961 light blue Comet four-door station wagon, which he purchased from the Delta Mercury Company in New Orleans within the past month. He stated that Charles Graham, a salesman at Delta Mercury, sold the Comet station wagon to him. Ferrie related that on leaving his home, he drove to the homes of Alvin Beaubouf and Melvin Coffey and picked them up in order that they might accompany him on the trip. He stated that at the time he left his home, he did not know where he was going. He said that the purpose of the trip was to merely relax and that at the time he didn't know whether he was going hunting, drinking, or driving. Ferrie stated he did not take any firearms with him when he left his home because he thought he might go out of the state of Louisiana and he did not know the hunting seasons were in other states. And he was also concerned about transporting firearms across state lines. Ferrie said that he'd been considering for some time the feasibility and possibility of opening an ice skating rink in New Orleans. He claimed that he made a telephone call, possibly from Melvin Coffey's home, to Chuck Rowland at the Winterland ice skating rink in Houston. He advised that this call to Rowland was charged to either telephone number 899-3598 or 486-3127. Ferrie claimed that he had no prior acquaintance with Rowland, but had knowledge of the fact that the Winterland skating rink was located in Houston. After arriving at the motel, he placed a telephone call to attorney G. Ray Gill, but was unable to complete this call. He placed a second call to the Town and Country Motel in an effort to determine whether attorney Gill was located at the Town and Country Motel. Ferrie further related that Alvin Beaubouf may have made a phone call to his home. He said that later they checked out of the Alamo Motel and went to the Bel Air skating rink on Chimney Rock Road in the Bellevue section of Houston. Remember this, the Bel Air skating rink, okay? Very important. Arriving there between 7:30 and 8 p.m., Ferrie stated he looked the skating rink over, tried to locate the owner, but the owner was unavailable. He said he remained at the Bel Air skating rink for approximately 45 minutes to 1 hour. On leaving the skating rink, they drove out Old Spanish Fort Trail and stopped at a restaurant near Telephone Road. They left this restaurant at approximately 9 p.m. or shortly after 9 p.m. and decided to drive to Galveston, Texas. He said that while en route to Galveston, they stopped at the Manned Spacecraft Center and looked around for 20 minutes. They then proceeded to Galveston, Texas, arriving there between 10:30 and 11:30 p.m. They immediately checked into room 117 at the Driftwood Motel, 3128 Seawall Boulevard in Galveston. After checking into the motel, they drove around in the vicinity of some old clubs in Galveston, Texas, returning to the motel sometime after midnight, and it could possibly have been as late as 1 a.m. Ferrie stated that he and his companions awakened roughly at noon, and after having breakfast, he went down to Main Street, Sears Roebuck Company, and where he purchased a jacket and a sweater and several other items. So we're jumping back now, okay? So when he went to Galveston, that was allegedly after the Winterland, but we're going to clarify the events up to the Winterland, okay? So Ferrie stated that he and his companions awakened roughly at noon. This is on Saturday, the 23rd. And after having breakfast, he went down to Main Street, Sears Roebuck and Company, where he purchased a jacket, sweater, and several other items. After leaving Sears, they drove directly to the Winterland Ice Skating Rink, 2400 Norfolk, which he had learned opened at 3:30 p.m. and closed at 5:30 p.m. Ferrie stated he rented skates and skated at the rink for a while, looking the situation over, and also taking into consideration the amount of business at the rink. He stated that he introduced himself to Chuck Rowland and spoke with him at length concerning the cost of installation and operation of the rink. Ferrie exhibited a leaflet of the Winterland Ice Skating Rink, 2400 Norfolk, Houston, Texas, which he had in his possession. Ferrie stated that during the time he was talking to Chuck Rowland, other employees of Rowland were present at the rink. He recalled specifically there was a young boy who was passing out skates and an older man who was on duty at the rink, but he does not recall whether he was introduced to these two individuals or not. Ferrie claimed that he remained at the Winterland skating rink for a period of approximately 2 hours, and after leaving there, he returned to the motel. Ferrie stated that they arose around 8 or 8:30 a.m. on November 24th, 1963. Okay, this is after they go to Galveston. They stay in at the Driftwood, and the morning of the 24th, he allegedly gets up at 8 or 8:30 in the morning. After having breakfast, they took the ferry across the bay to pick up the road to Port Arthur that runs along the coast. Ferrie stated the first stop they made after reaching Port Arthur was at the Gulf Service Station on the left-hand side of the highway in Port Arthur, Texas, where they purchased a new set of spark plugs for the Comet station wagon. He stated that there was a television set in the station, and he had walked into the station. There was a picture on the television set showing the shooting of Lee Oswald in the basement of the Dallas City Jail. Ferrie said he presumed he was looking at the original live broadcast of the shooting, and that this was in the vicinity of 12 noon on that date. He said that after changing the spark plugs in the station wagon, he ran the car up on the rack in order that the attendant could check the transmission and differential. Ferrie estimated that he remained at the service station approximately 20 to 30 minutes. They then left Port Arthur and drove to Orange, Texas, and after crossing the Louisiana state line, they stopped at Buster's Bar and Restaurant. He stated that the operator of Buster's Bar and Restaurant is Marion James Johnson, who is a client of attorney G. Ray Gill. He stated that he contacted Johnson at the bar and restaurant and talked to Johnson for approximately 30 minutes discussing the status of an appeal on a perjury conviction of Johnson in connection with an income tax case on Sheriff Reed, St. Lake Charles, Louisiana. So now they go and they interview, that's what Ferrie initially said had happened, okay? Now they interview Melvin Coffey. Let me just give you a hint. Neither David Ferrie nor Melvin Coffey were on this trip, okay? Coffey stated that Ferrie picked both he and Beaubouf up on Friday evening, November 22nd, 63, and they left New Orleans in Ferrie's Comet station wagon and drove to John Paul's restaurant in Kenner, where they ate supper. He said they left Kenner between 9 and 9:30 p.m. that night and traveled by way of Baton Rouge, Lafayette, Lake Charles, and on to Houston, Texas. Coffey stated they arrived in Houston, Texas, approximately 4:30 a.m., November 23rd, 63, and checked into the Ala Motel. He stated they did not leave the motel that morning, but retired shortly after their arrival. He stated that to the best of his recollection, they arose approximately 2 p.m. and the three of them went to Sears Roebuck and Company, where they purchased jackets and sweaters. Coffey stated that they went to Winterland skating rink, where they went ice skating for a while and later contacted the owner of the rink. Coffey related that Ferrie was interested in the possibility of opening a skating rink in New Orleans and had talked to the owner of the Winterland skating rink concerning the cost of installation and operation of a skating rink. After leaving the skating rink, they returned to the motel, where they remained until approximately 7:30 or 8 p.m., at which time they checked out. Now, note, we're still at the 23rd, Saturday the 23rd, okay? After leaving the skating rink, they returned to the motel, where they remained until approximately 7:30 or 8 p.m., at which time they checked out. They stopped to eat at an unknown restaurant and then proceeded to Galveston, Texas. He stated they arrived at Galveston, Texas at approximately 11 or 11:30 p.m. and checked into the Driftwood Motel and retired for the night. Coffey stated that they arose early the next morning of November 24th, 63, and after having breakfast, drove to Port Arthur, Texas. He said they had purchased a set of spark plugs for the Comet station wagon at an unknown service station in Port Arthur, Texas. They then drove through Orange, Texas, after crossing the Louisiana state line, stopped at a bar and restaurant operated by an individual known only to him by the name of Buster. Coffey said that Ferrie knew Buster, and that after Ferrie had conversation with Buster approximately 1/2 hour, they proceeded to Alexandria, Louisiana. Coffey stated that Alvin Beaubouf had relatives in Alexandria and that they planned to socialize while in Alexandria and then return to New Orleans. He said that after arriving in Alexandria, David Ferrie attempted to contact attorney G. Ray Gill, but was unsuccessful in contacting him. Ferrie then called his home and learned from Leighton Martins that allegations had been made involving Ferrie in the assassination of President Kennedy. Coffey said that after learning this, they immediately returned to New Orleans, and that on arrival in New Orleans, Ferrie dropped him at his home. Coffey stated that he's never heard David Ferrie make any statements that he thought President Kennedy should be killed, and has never heard him outline any plans or make any comments as to how this could be done or how it should be done. All right, so now we have an FBI document that talks about their time at the Alamo Motel. This is an extremely, extremely important and extremely telling document when you dissect all the information on it. On November 28th, 63, Lee Fletcher, porter, Alamo Motel, made available the registration card for the 23rd of November, 1963, which reflects the following information. David Ferrie, Alvin Beaubouf, and Melvin Coffey checked into room 19, Alamo Motel at 4:30 a.m., November 23rd, 1963, from New Orleans, Louisiana, and stayed until November the 24th, 1963, around 8 or 9 p.m. Okay? But what did Ferrie tell them they did? Ferrie told them that they went back from the ice skating rink to the motel on the 23rd and around 8 or 9 at night left. But that's not what the notation on the card say. The documentation surrounding their stay shows that the room was considered occupied until November 24th, which is Sunday. Okay? They were driving a Comet automobile bearing Louisiana license plate 784892 or 784895. While at the motel, Ferrie made the following phone calls. The New Orleans numbers that he called, he called G. Ray Gill's office, he called the Town and Country, and then he called 2 radio stations, WSHO, and in the documentation it says WDSH radio, but there's no such thing. There's no such thing as WDSH radio. It's WDSU television, okay? That's who we called. And you'll note that by putting WDSH radio, they tried to hide that fact. Now, why would they be calling these numbers? Well, if you'll recall, Kerry Thornley made it a big point to point out to Garrison in his 50-page confession affidavit that he had good friends, particularly Walter Sheridan at WDSU television, and he knew the people who were working at WSHO, right? So both of these radio stations are cutouts. That's what they're doing here. They're acting as cutouts. And my suspicion is that the WSHO and WDSU calls were meant to either check in with or relay information to or from Kerry Thornley, who, like I said, in his 50-page confession letter to Garrison, made it an overt point that he had friends there at these places, okay? Then there's one call made to a local number. And in no document anywhere ever has this been identified. The number is MO 4-3581. Okay. Of course, I identified it. I think we'll get to that. So now the Winterland Ice Skating Rink, otherwise known as the Winterland Ice Arena. We're going to read the testimony of a man named Roland Charles Rowland. He's the man who was working at the Winterland at the time that David Ferrie allegedly came, okay? So first off, I need you to think real hard. Have you ever met anybody named Roland? No parent would do that to their child, okay? And they didn't, and we'll see that coming up. All right, so Mr. Rowland, calling your attention to the time you returned to the ice rink, did you have occasion to meet someone? Yes. Who was that? A very unusual thing, Mr. Dave Ferrie. The reason this is such a memory to me was because of the way he approached me. He had called a week before or several days before asking about our services. We get many calls from people coming out of town because ice skating is an unusual thing to many people and they like to try the sport. Mr. Ferrie made quite a point, actually. He made a little bit of a pest of himself at the time. Mr. Rowland, I'm going to show you an exhibit marked for the purpose of identification S10 and ask you if you recognize the person depicted. Yes. Who is that person? Mr. Dave Ferrie. Is that the man you are now talking about? Yes. Would you like a description of him? Yes, go ahead. He had red hair, wore a toupee, sort of a ruddy complexion. Did you have a conversation with Mr. Ferrie at this time? Yes, I did. What was that? He came in and made known he was there, his party, himself, and 2 others. Was he with anyone at the time? He was by himself when he came up, but later he brought 2 others over and introduced them to me, but I do not recall their names, and frankly, he came back and talked to me. I was waiting on people, and he made quite a point of the fact that he was there. Mr. Diamond, Clay Shaw's attorney, this is during the Clay Shaw trial, Mr. Diamond objects. He says, I object to this conclusion. The court then says, you can testify as to how many times he met with you or spoke with you, but you're drawing a conclusion. And then Mr. Alcock says, Mr. Rowland, after this first encounter or introduction by Ferrie, did you have occasion to talk to him again that same afternoon? Yes. How many times? Approximately 5. And what was said on these occasions by Ferrie? Nothing, except to let me know he was there. And I think you said Ferrie did not rent any skates. That is correct. He did not skate. He spent most of the time walking around in the lobby, looking in the pro shop and watching the skaters. He made a number of trips to the telephone booth and then his 2 companions, and he said he was talking to his companions and talking to me on another occasion. Now, with respect to your description of Mr. Ferrie, which the record will show you did offer to describe him and did describe him, did you not? I believe I did. You said he had on a toupee. Yes. And by that you mean false hair. That's right. And you say it was a reddish brown, reddish in color. Was that well groomed or very messy looking? Quite curly is the way I would explain it. Would you term it spotty? What is your definition of spotty? Appearance of having pieces of hair missing from it. He doesn't know about that. So let's move on to the next question. Now let me ask you, with respect to David Ferrie's eyebrows, do you recall anything unusual about them? They were unusual, but I can't explain in what way. You do recall they were unusual, like possibly they were plucked or some shape, you say. Quite possibly you saw them. Yes. Were they bushy? You mean wide, bushy eyebrows? Let me help you a minute. May I have the pictures of Ferrie, please? I don't know the number. And then by Mr. Diamond, he says, I show you first a photograph that has been marked for identification as State 8, Mr. Rowland purporting to be a photograph of David Ferrie after his decease, and ask you to observe the eyebrows in that photograph. Yes. I also show you another photograph marked for identification State 10, likewise purporting to be a photograph of Dave Ferrie, and ask you to observe not only the eyebrows, but the back of the hair on this photograph. Okay. Having seen these photographs, are you able to give us any more detailed description of the appearance of Dave Ferrie's eyebrows? They appeared to me, what I recall, full. They weren't plucked, but they were shaped up like a woman does, in a sense. You said that they were full. That is correct. How many times did Ferrie introduce himself to you? Approximately 4 or 5. Did he mention his name on 4 or 5 occasions? Yes, sir, he did. Did you consider this strange? Quite strange. Recrossed by Mr. Diamond. One moment, you said Mr. Ferrie introduced himself to you 5 times. I said a number of times, and each time there was quite a point made out as to who he was. Didn't you say 5 times? And Alcock objects. The witness is not responding to my question. Let me just fast forward past this stuff. Didn't you say he introduced himself to you about 5 times? I said about 5 times, yes. Yes, in what words, how did he introduce himself to you upon these occasions? Through conversation. Did he say, I'm David Ferrie 5 times, or what? He pointed out his name like I, Dave Ferrie, this or that, in conversation. How about the first time he introduced himself to you? What did he say then? He said, I'm Dave Ferrie. I'm the one that called you from New Orleans about a skating party, and I have my party here. Was there anything unusual about that first introduction? Yes, because when I talked to him on the phone, that's a public session, and you just come in and skate. You thought it unusual for him to identify himself when he comes in. At a public skating session? I sure do. It happens very seldom. So, one thing I need to point out is that Dave Ferrie says that he went there and went skating to the FBI, but yet Mr. Rowland, Chuck Rowland, tells the FBI that he didn't go skating. He just went over and sat by the phone and made some calls. Okay? The descriptions he gives of David Ferrie with the red wig, Dave Ferrie did have a red wig, but he's talking about his eyebrows being all big and full. David Ferrie painted his eyebrows on. Okay? He didn't have big, full eyebrows. He had what almost looked like black magic marker drawn on his face. So there's something up here with the description of the eyebrows, right? But we will return to Mr. Rowland here shortly, and we'll see that even Mr. Rowland is not who we're told that he is. All right? All right, so here we go. The following investigation, FBI document. I read David William Ferrie. Investigation conducted by Carlos Kirby Jr. at Galveston, Texas. Okay? So we're fast forwarding to Galveston. Remember, David Ferrie said that after the Winterland, they went to Galveston and arrived the 23rd at night at 11:30, something like that. But the documentation on the Alamo Motel shows that they didn't check out till the 24th until 8 or 9 p.m. Okay? So here we are at Galveston. On November 28th, 63, Mrs. Mary Doveri, clerk, Driftwood Motor Hotel, 3128 Seawall Boulevard, Galveston, Texas, exhibited hotel registration card number 38068, which reflected that Melvin S. Coffey, Alvin Beaubouf, and David Ferrie registered at this hotel at 11 p.m. November 23rd, 1963, and were assigned room 117. They listed their addresses as 618 North Pierce, New Orleans, Louisiana. Records reflected that they checked out November 24th, 1963, time not listed. This is a document from Garrison's files, and Garrison has written in here, false address given as to D5 at least. Or DF at least, and there's another marker as far as David Ferrie goes. Yeah, 618 North Pierce was actually Melvin Coffey's address. Mrs. Doveri stated that on November 24th, 1963, one of these individuals made a telephone call to Alexandria, Louisiana, talked 3 minutes, and the total charges were $1.05. Telephone number called at Alexandria, unknown. So the one part of this entire trip that I haven't figured out is what happened in Alexandria. That's where Shaw's parents lived. There's a small airport there. There was also a hotel there that Clay Shaw had stayed at in the past that Jim Garrison really dug into heavily. So I don't know exactly what happened in Alexandria, but I have a feeling it had something to do with Clay Shaw, because Clay Shaw was in Dallas with Erwin Heyman of the Jewish Agency in Switzerland. And so from there, he has to end up in Portland, where he shows up in Portland after getting off a train allegedly on the what date was that? It was the 25th. Okay. So we have a gap of about 3 days that we don't know where Clay Shaw is, because he's supposed to be en route to this convention. But that gets canceled because of Kennedy, and he shows up a couple days later. So we have this huge gap of Clay Shaw where there's literally no documentation on anything. It's very frustrating. Those have been hidden. We're never going to see those documents. But I'm pretty sure the trip to Alexandria had something, because it's out of the way. When you look at where Alexandria is on a map, it's not on the way home. It's out of the way. So they had to have gone there and done something. But what they did, who knows? On November 28, 63, Mrs. Shirley Dial, clerk at the Driftwood Motor Hotel, recalled that the above individuals checked out around 10 a.m. on November 24th. Okay, so they're checking out of Galveston at the Driftwood 10 a.m. on the 24th. But the Ala Motel is still booked until 8 or 9 p.m. that night, the 24th, right? Right. So you have two hotels booked the same night, the 23rd. Keep that in mind. The above registration card reflected that these individuals were driving a Ford station wagon. Remember what David Ferrie owned. He owned a light blue Mercury Comet station wagon, not a Ford station wagon. But we're not going to tell you about the Mercury Comet and the Ford Falcon station wagon, which is what it was. They're identical vehicles with different branding. Okay? They're two distinct cars, but they look identical. This is very, very important. All right, let me go ahead and read this. This is a notation that Jim Garrison or one of his men made on this document. It says, an observation on an American success story. Note subsequent upward mobility of these 4 arrivals in Galveston the night of November 23rd, 1963. So they're commenting on how these people had became an American success story. It's a little tongue-in-cheek, right? So in early 64, Ferrie and Beaubouf jointly opened a filling station. Melvin Coffee is hired by NASA at Michaud, Space Vehicle Construction. And Breck Wall, who is an associate of Jack Ruby, who's not supposed to be connected to any of these guys here, he moves from Dallas to Las Vegas when he becomes a headliner for at the Thunderbird, which was run by Louis McWillie, who was an associate of Jack Ruby, right? So Breck Wall, we're not going to talk about too much, but Breck Wall was living at the Adolphus Hotel, allegedly the same day that these guys get to Galveston. Breck Wall drives down to Galveston. But Breck Wall never actually went to Galveston, and that's a whole other story we're not going to talk about today. It was another alibi phone call. It was supposed to be Breck Wall contacting Jack Ruby at the house of Robert McEwen, right? That's a false story, okay? Jack Ruby didn't call anybody at the house of Robert McEwen. Jack Ruby was in Galveston on the 23rd, okay? And all the pictures of Jack Ruby on Saturday the 23rd and at the hallway at the police department and at the midnight press conference, that was Samuel Ruby. That was not Jack Ruby. Jack Ruby left to go to Galveston. I don't include the documents in this presentation because it's kind of offshoot from what I'm talking about. But somebody witnessed, I believe that Saturday, the 23rd, Jack Ruby in either a hardware store or a sporting goods store, and he was either buying or selling a gun. So this person came forward after Jack Ruby shot Oswald and told the story to the FBI. So here we have the name Breck Wall. Okay, Breck Wall is actually not in Galveston. He's actually still up there, and he's actually probably calling McEwen to where Jack Ruby was. All right, but that's going to be a whole nother talk. Let's move on. The following investigation conducted by S.A. Joseph B. Kilgore at Port Arthur, Texas. November 28, 63, William Frank Powell, Week Service Station, 3649 Gulfway Drive, Highway 87, Port Arthur, Texas, advised on Sunday, November 24th, 63, about 1 or 2 p.m., 3 men in a light blue Comet station wagon stopped at the station. So remember, it was a Ford station wagon that left the motel at Galveston, or was registered at Galveston, but here we're back to having the Comet station wagon at the service station. The motor was not running smoothly due to oil on the spark plugs, and they purchased a new set. The driver was described as a white male in his early 20s, 5'9" to 5 inches 10, weighed 130 to 140, light brown hair, short cut. One of the other passengers met this same description. The third passenger was described as a white male, age 35 to 45. He was 5'10" to 6 foot tall, heavy build, dark hair. Powell stated that he did not discuss their origin or destination. The men watched television for a short time. Believed to be after the actual murder of Oswald, Powell advised they seemed to be in somewhat of a hurry. He does not recall the direction they went when they left. And then we see there's a notation at the bottom here. It says, no other pages in this document pertain to Ferrie, and no pages on something in this document are classified. So that's just a notation that Garrison had observed. But here again, we have allegedly David Ferrie and the two boys at the Week Service Station, November 24th, between 1 and 2 p.m. But remember, the Ala Motel, whoever was staying there, didn't check out till 8 or 9 p.m. on that same date. FBI statement, this is just kind of a supplement to it. William Frank Powell, Week Service Station, Highway 87, Port Arthur, Texas, advised on November 24 last in the afternoon, 3 men in a light blue 61 Comet station wagon, stopped at the station and purchased a set of spark plugs. Driver described as a white male, early 20s, blah, blah, blah. I'll skip all this. Number 2, described as a 45 to 50 years old, 5'10" to 6 foot tall, heavy build, dark hair, wearing trousers and a cowboy hat. Okay, so now the big husky guy that they're with, who was not David Ferrie, is wearing a cowboy hat. David Ferrie didn't own a cowboy hat. Number 3, described same as driver. While waiting for repairs, individual watched the TV. All right, so now we have a Ferrie interview by John Voles at the DA's office, December 15th, 1966. Voles asks, did you take a trip on November 22nd, 63? Ferrie says, whatever the day that the verdict was rendered in the Marcello case, I took a weekend vacation. Where did you go? Houston, Galveston, and Vinton. I had some business for Gil to take care of. So note, he's saying he went on the trip to take care of some business for Gil, but he's already given a statement that he didn't know what he was going to do. He didn't know if he was going to drive or go hunting or what they were doing. And then he changed the story. Oh, yeah, like Boboof remembered that there was an ice skating rink there, so that's where we decided to go. All right, but this is like much later. This is 3 years later, and he can't remember what he told the FBI the first time, right? So now he's telling them he had some business for Gil to take care of. Voles asked, what's this business with Gil? In one of his cases in federal court, Marion James Johnson was on appeal. I forget whether I was asked to ask him for money or a transcript or what. You were going hunting. Did you take any weapons with you? Yes. What kind? Shotguns. How many? I assume offhand a weapon apiece. But if you'll remember in that initial FBI interview, he said that he didn't take any guns because he was worried about crossing state lines and didn't want to get in any trouble. Right? So here we have a direct contradiction to what he had told them previously. You went to Houston and went skating. Do you recall whether it was the same day you left here? We left at night. We stayed in a motel. Have to go back to the FBI for accuracy. Sometime the next day we went ice skating. I was the only one that knew how. Did you rent skates or have your own? We rented them. I don't think I have my own skates. I think we rented them. Okay, so remember, initially, he tells them when they went skating, and then when they interview Chuck Rowland tells him that David Ferrie didn't go skating, right? So here you have another contradiction in the story. Did you leave for Galveston in the morning or night? Do you know what you did when you got to Galveston besides finding it dead? I remember the morning in Galveston because we went out looking for bars and found out the only thing you could buy was beer. By our standards, it was dead. It couldn't get deader. So far, the vacation had been falling on its head. It seems to me it was inclement, some inclemency in the weather, coolness. I don't know what we expected for November, but we wanted something pleasant. I'm trying to recall whether I stopped at Vinton on the way to Houston or coming back. Okay, so we have a couple more contradictions. Here he's talking about, I remember the morning in Galveston because we went out looking for bars and found the only thing you could buy was beer. But he had previously told them that they left Houston 8 or 9 at night, got there about 11, checked in 11:30, and then went out and the bars were dead, right? So at first it was at night and now it's in the morning. I'm trying to recall whether I stopped at Vinton on the way to Houston or the way coming back. I think I may have my dates all mixed up here. I think we stayed in Vinton that night, the night of the 22nd, the night of whatever date we left here. Okay, so now he's changing his story again. Now he's saying that they left from New Orleans and they went to Vinton and he stayed the night in Vinton. But that's not what happened, right? We know that's not what happened. Even in the official story, that's not what happened. They went to the Alamo Motel in Houston. And then Ferrie says, we went to the Marion James Johnson's Roadhouse, a combination bar, etc. That was in Vinton. Yes. You see, that has already been testified to by everyone else that it was on the way back. Melvin Coffey stated it was on the way back. But Melvin Coffey wouldn't know because he wasn't on this trip. Do you recall where you stayed in Galveston? No. Do you recall where you stayed in Alexandria? No. My only source would be the FBI. You're positive that all three of you came back together. That's my recollection. The only way I would know for sure would be to call Mr. Wall or the individual. Now, notice, Mr. Wall, if he's talking about Breck Wall, he should not have known Breck Wall. He shouldn't have any contact with Breck Wall. Breck Wall should be like a completely irrelevant person to him. Or is Mr. Wall with the FBI? Because I've never seen any other reference to a Mr. Wall in the FBI. So this is extremely suspect of a statement here that I can't really conclude on. All right, so we had a New York Times article written by Nan Robertson, February 25th, 67. This is some kind of highlights from it. Archives on David Ferrie trip, FBI reports on testimony of Ferrie and others. left New Orleans about 9 p.m. November 22nd with 2 men. Houston Alamo Motel registration card shows Ferrie, Alvin Bobouf, and Melvin Coffey checked into room 19 at 4:30 a.m. November 23rd. November 23rd date written over November 22nd date. Porter said because of the early morning hour, he was sure it was November 23rd. So that I didn't really put too much. At first, I thought this was kind of a conspiratorial thing, but I just realized that it was probably correct, and because there's no way they could have gotten there prior to when they said. So records show they stayed until Sunday, November the 24th. But this conflicts with the card FBI showed in Galveston, where Mary Dovery, clerk in the Driftwood, showed registration card showing same 3 men checked into the Driftwood 11 p.m. Saturday, November 23rd. Another clerk, Shirley Dial, said they left about 10 a.m. Sunday, November 24th. AAA puts Houston at 364 miles, or an 8 to 9 hour drive from New Orleans. Galveston, 50 miles from Houston, about an hour. Dallas, 243 miles, or 5.5 hours from Houston. Report cards for both motels list car license as 784895, which is David Ferrie's license to his Mercury Comet. Ferrie told agents it was a light blue 61 Comet station wagon he bought in New Orleans several weeks before. At Houston, it was listed as a Comet automobile, and at Galveston, it was listed as a Ford station wagon. Okay? Ford station wagon, that becomes very important. At Houston Motel, Ferrie made several long-distance calls, motel records 1 local and 4 to New Orleans. 2 of these are to radio stations, WSHO and WDSH. I'm telling you, there is no WDSH. It's WDSU. Other 2 to Town and Country Motel, owned by Marcello, whom Ferrie said was involved in a court trial, and that he, Ferrie, had to be in New Orleans on November 22nd in connection with the trial. And to the Fontainebleau Motel, at which Bobouf's widowed mother, Evelyn, was a switchboard operator. Last call cited was collect. Ferrie told Secret Service he and companions returned to New Orleans about 9:30 p.m. Sunday, November 24th. So the biggest problem here is the contradiction in the cars, all right? One's listed as a Comet, the other's listed as a Ford. Despite the fact that the same car with different branding, there's still different branding, right? This is very important because the people who went to the Winterland and to these motels were driving the Comet station wagon while David Ferrie was driving the Ford station wagon. All right, so what did Ferrie really do? First, let me read the statement from Jack Martin. He's being interviewed by Pershing Gervais on Garrison's team. He says, what's Ferrie's brother's name? Ferrie's brother's name, by the way, is Parmalee Ferrie. So if you want to look him up, he's a pretty interesting guy. He goes, I don't know. He's mixed up in a nuclear business of some kind of way. He's an atomic scientist. So anyway, Ferrie starts to get his business straightened out with the airlines, and they got a deal with G. Ray Gill as G. Ray Gill's representative. Gill put him to work as a half-assed investigator to research briefs for him, and Gill paid him a little money. Ferrie got Brownlee in there, and from Gill's own lips to me, they got into my files, and they're shaking me down, and Gill got tired of Brownlee and threw his ass out. He run him off. I do happen to know, I can't tell you how I know, but it's damn reliable, that Ferrie was in Dallas, at least in Fort Worth, 2 days before the assassination of President Kennedy. I understand he was to fly 3 people from there to Laredo, Texas, either there or Matamoros, Mexico. That's all I know. I'll tell you who Acacia last worked for when he was here. Acacia worked for the public relations man at the Kigali building who handled Shiro's campaign for the Massachusetts race. So Jack Martin, who will later change his story, said that Dave Ferrie was in Fort Worth 2 days before the assassination. Why is this believable? It's believable because he despised David Ferrie. He knew David Ferrie was a pedophile and he hated his fucking guts. So, co-conspirator or not, he didn't give a fuck. He threw him under the bus. He will later change his story and say he was just drunk calling, but he got a talking to, I'm pretty sure. All right, so the next document we have from the Garrison files. Check Daily Star, Hammond, Louisiana. Supposedly a graduate student, presumed Southeastern, says Ferrie hid out the night of the assassination in a dorm room in Hammond. There's an airport in Hammond, also home of Shaw's mother. Athletic director Grady Martin might have some additional info. All right, so ignore Grady Martin. He does nothing on Grady Martin anywhere, period. So all we have is, at this point, is we have the statement in this Garrison file that says that Ferrie hid out the night of the assassination in a dorm in Hammond. So how could he have hidden in the dorm in Hammond on the night of the assassination if he was driving to Houston and staying at the Alamo Motel, right? Big problem here. So the FBI goes and interviews Thomas Compton, who is the student at Southeastern, who's a friend of David Ferrie. Compton and Ferrie go way back to the Civil Air Patrol, like 6 or 7 years prior. And there's some other interesting connections here that need to be explored. So Mr. Compton continued to state that on Sunday after the assassination at 5:30 a.m., he was awakened by Dave Ferrie in his dormitory bed at the University of Southeastern in Hammond, Louisiana. Mr. Compton stated that until this day, he's uncertain how Dave Ferrie located him on this date. At this time, Dave Ferrie was in hysterics and near tears as he stated, "The police are at my home and have taken some of my things." Compton stated that Dave Ferrie did not elaborate on my things and stated that Ferrie also related that he didn't do anything wrong. The two talked for a while on different unrelated subjects, and then Ferrie made 2 calls to New Orleans, and Compton believed they were to G. Ray Gill, attorney at law. Compton stated that Dave Ferrie left at approximately 8:30 a.m. the same morning, and it is believed that he returned to New Orleans in a Ford Falcon station wagon painted light blue. Okay, Ford Falcon station wagon. Where have we heard about that before? At the Galveston Hotel, right? Compton stated that Dave Ferrie did not tell him he'd been to Texas. Compton stated he'd never met Lee Harvey Oswald, and also that he could not connect him in any way with the CAP. The only knowledge Oswald had was from Mr. Bill Wolfe, who headed the New Orleans Astronomers Club. Okay, this is like holy shit, mind-blowing, this last paragraph. And it wasn't until I went through all the Oswald stuff before I realized how amazing this last paragraph is. But let me explain away a couple things here. So he says that Ferrie showed up Sunday at 5:30 a.m., okay, and that Dave Ferrie was freaking out because the police went to his house and took his things. That is impossible because that incident didn't happen until just after midnight on Monday. So Compton is mixing up his stories here. He says he's uncertain how Dave Ferrie located him. That's a lie also, and we'll get to that here momentarily. So yeah, Dave being in hysterics, that wouldn't have happened until the next day. That could not have happened Sunday 5:30 because the police don't go to Ferrie's residence until after midnight on the 25th, which is Monday. So there's a problem there. Dave Ferrie says he sees him. He leaves at 8:30 in the morning on the same day. And he leaves in the Ford Falcon station wagon painted light blue. So let's go to the next statement. Let me comment real quick on the Bill Wolfe stuff, okay? So Bill Wolfe at the New Orleans Astronomers Club, this is extremely controversial because the time that Bill Wolfe and the Astronomy Club stuff was going on, which the FBI says was in 56, impossible for it to have been 56, and Bill Wolfe explains this to John Armstrong when John Armstrong gets a hold of him. And basically what happens is the time period that Bill Wolfe is supposed to have been interacting with Oswald is at a time that Oswald is provably in the Marines over in Atsugi, right? So I did extensive work on that, and I'm not going to get into any details, but the person who was working in New Orleans at that time period and who Bill Wolfe met with was 100% certainly not Lee Harvey Oswald. So we have a problem with that, that's a whole nother conversation. All right, now we're going to get to the statement of Frank J. Chelona Jr. And honestly, I've been doing this 7 years. July will be 7 years. I've been doing this basically full time. And so I've read hundreds of thousands of pages of documents. And of all the documents I've read, this is by far the most important document of all of Kennedy research. And it gets ignored consistently. After this, I would say the next most important is the 50-page affidavit from Kerry Thornley. Okay, so I don't know what people are fucking expecting with document releases. There's nothing new coming. You don't need anything new. We got everything. We got the goods. And you don't need thousands of pages of documents. All you need is a handful, right? And this is one of them. So this is a statement of Frank J. Chelona, who was Thomas Compton's roommate at Southeastern University, okay, in Hammond. In the fall of 1963, my roommate was Thomas Compton. We were residing in Holloway Smith Hall, Southeastern University College. I think that on approximately November 22nd or 23rd, he told me that a friend of his would be staying in our room. Okay, so Chelona was made aware in advance that someone was going to be coming and staying in their room, right? So Thomas Compton lied when he said he didn't know how David Ferrie found him that day. So Thomas Compton, you can say, is a conspirator after the fact. The reason for this person staying was said to be that he could be where many people could see him, establishing an alibi, right? Being where people could see you, just as he discussed at the party with Kerry Thornley and Perry Russo, right? And Clay Shaw said he knows where he's going to be, right? So I believe all that stuff because it's corroborated by the other documents. I was told his name was Dave. I don't remember for certain whether I was ever told his last name. I was told he was a psychologist. Well, in that year, in the phone book for New Orleans, David Ferrie was listed as a psychologist, right? So we're talking about David Ferrie. Here we go. And then on the 23rd of November, in the afternoon or perhaps the evening, I went to my room and found the man sleeping in my roommate's bed. His back was to me, so I couldn't see his face at the time. I noticed, however, that he was sleeping fully clothed and with his hat on. At this time, I also noticed that his hair was very strange looking. I believe that I was introduced to him later on in the evening, but I don't remember the nature of the introduction or what was said, except that not much was said at all. I asked my roommate about this man, and in particular about his hair. I was told that he was bald and that he pasted theatrical hair at the point where his hat met his head. I'm not certain that he spent the entire night in the room or that he even spent more than a few hours in the early evening. The next time I saw him was Sunday morning in the lobby of the dormitory. It was very crowded as everyone was watching the funeral on television. I don't believe I saw him anymore after Sunday morning. Later that day, my roommate told me that Dave had gone back home. I don't know how he got home. Perhaps my roommate drove him. At a later date, my roommate disclosed to me that he had either known or had heard of Lee Harvey Oswald through the Civil Air Patrol, of which he was a member for a short time. Okay, so that is a blockbuster document because that debunks the idea that David Ferrie ever went to the Winterland, because he didn't. Okay, Dave Ferrie will be at the shooting of Tippit. He'll be on the Knoll first. He'll then go to the shooting of Tippit, where he's involved in the assassination of J.D. Tippit. He then drives Carl Mather's vehicle, the gray Plymouth, somewhere, I suspect to an address on Belmont, but I can't prove this or confirm it in any way, an address in Belmont and Fort Worth. And then from there, he will do a vehicle swap, or somewhere he'll do a vehicle swap to the light blue Ford Falcon station wagon, not the light blue Mercury Comet. And he'll drive the Ford Falcon station wagon directly from Dallas to Hammond. Okay. That's when he shows up the night of the 22nd, as per the Garrison document. And the person who puts him in this room is Frank Chelona. Okay. So David Ferrie shows up the night of the 22nd in Hammond. He sleeps over in Thomas Compton's bed. And now here Chelona says the afternoon or early evening. Well, it had to have been a little earlier than that, because David Ferrie will get up from here after being seen by Frank Chelona. He'll get into the light blue Ford Falcon station wagon and he will drive down to Galveston. There he will meet up with the people who went on the trip, right? Not him. He'll meet up with them. He'll check into the room and then he will log the Ford Falcon station wagon on the registration. Then he will drive back to Hammond, Louisiana, go back to Thomas Compton's place. This is most likely where Thomas Compton says he woke him up about 5:30 in the morning, right? And so the timing on all this stuff is a little suspect because you have to take into consideration the lack of a highway system and the ability to drive very quickly down a standard road. I really don't know what the roads were like in the 60s, but a 350-mile drive today, you knock out in like 5 hours, right? It took a little bit longer back then. So you have to take that in consideration. But that completely corresponds with David Ferrie showing back up and Thomas Compton's story, although Thomas Compton screwed up on the story because the problems at David Ferrie's apartment in New Orleans didn't happen until after Monday the 25th, right? But the timing seems to be closely correlative for David Ferrie to have driven to Galveston, checked him into the hotel, and then drove back to Hammond, Louisiana. So Ferrie's actual timeline. Ferrie's in Fort Worth on 11/20/63 as per Jack Martin. Ferrie's then in Dallas on November 22nd, 63, where he's one of two shooters on the Knoll, and he's one of two shooters of J.D. Tippit, the other being Kerry Thornley. Ferrie then hid out in Hammond the night of 11/22/63 as per the Garrison memo. Chelona sees Ferrie sleeping on Saturday, 11/23/1963 in the afternoon or evening in Hammond, and this confirms Ferrie never went to Houston. Then he will drive down to the Driftwood Motel, check in around 11 o'clock. Thomas Compton then puts Ferrie in Hammond 5:30 a.m. Sunday morning, 11/24 until 8:30 a.m. Chelona puts Ferrie in Hammond on 11/25/63 in the morning during Kennedy's funeral, because despite the fact that he said on 11/24, he probably was there on the 24th, but the 25th was the actual day of Kennedy's funeral. The 2 days before that, there were still TV stuff and they were having viewings and all, or whatever they were doing, right? So that's super important also because it shows that Ferrie and his Ford Falcon did make the drive down to Galveston and then back up to Hammond. And then Ferrie is in New Orleans and meets with Garrison on the 25th, 1963. Okay. That's Ferrie's actual timeline. The question then becomes, like, who actually drove Alvin Boboof and quote-unquote Melvin Coffee on that trip. Well, if you look at the descriptions from not only Chuck Rowland, but also from the serviceman at Weeks service station, this guy's 5'10" to 6 foot, big, husky, and he had a ruddy complexion. Come on, you guys know who this is. It's Arcacha. Arcacha was also closely with these guys because they did the Homa break-ins together, right, back in 61. So Arcacha and Leighton, I'm giving it away, Leighton Martins and Alvin Boboof, they all knew each other for years, right? There's no other person who matches that description. And he had to have obviously borrowed Ferrie's wig, which is why Ferrie wore the hat with the hair on it the whole weekend, right? It's become so obvious once you actually get a grip on what the hell's going on. All right, so just a little more information from FBI reports that would put some of this blame on David Ferrie as being responsible for the shooting. This is an interview with Mrs. Gay, who was a client of Clara Flournoy Gay, who was a client of G. Ray Gill. She stated that just prior to the assassination, she was having G. Ray Gill do some legal work for her of a civil nature. She made several trips to Gill's office and observed David Ferrie, who had an office at Gill's office, and she understood that Ferrie was an investigator for Gill. The day following the John F. Kennedy assassination, she, Mrs. Gay, went to Gill's office and observed two female employees were cleaning out Ferrie's desk. She saw a chart or a sketch, and what caught her eye was the fact that this chart had Elm written on it and what appeared to be a street. There was also a building on the street that was with a square with letters VIP written in this square. Mrs. Gay stated that she remarked to the receptionist that this should be turned over to the FBI, the receptionist being Alice Guidros, who provided a fake alibi for David Ferrie on the early afternoon of November 22nd, right? Mrs. Gay stated she remarked to the receptionist that this should be turned over to the FBI, and the receptionist then picked it up off the desk and threw it in the trash can, stating it was nothing. Mrs. Gay stated that she remarked to the receptionist that this should be turned over to the FBI. I duplicated that, sorry. Mrs. Gay stated she then took the document from the trash can, stating she would give it to the FBI, and the receptionist then grabbed the document from Mrs. Gay's hand again and threw it in the trash can. Mrs. Gay seems to be about 60 years old, reasonably intelligent, slightly nervous, and very cooperative. She appears to be the type of individual that likes to see justice done. Captain Fred Sewell Sr., that's from New Orleans Police Department. All right, so what really happened on November 22nd as it pertains to David Ferrie? David Ferrie fired the very first shot from the corner of the picket fence. This shot hits Kennedy in the throat. If you can see here on the left-hand side, we have a notation, Ed Hoffman's location. Ed Hoffman is a deaf mute who witnessed this. He then provided damn good descriptions of the men that he saw. Ed Hoffman describes a man as having a black hat with a wide felt band and a dark blue suit. But here, I'll let him explain it to you.
However, his story is confirmed by another eyewitness, Ed Hoffman, a deaf mute who is interviewed here for the first time.
I'd gotten off work early because I had a dentist's appointment. I was traveling down the freeway here, and I remembered that President Kennedy was coming to visit Dallas. I parked my car here. I realized at this spot that I would be able to see Kennedy pass close by. I stood here and waited, and I was looking towards where he would be coming from. I suddenly saw two men who looked suspicious directly over there in the car park.
25 years ago, these trees did not obscure the view. From his position at the side of the freeway, Ed Hoffman could clearly see the car park area behind the grassy knoll.
I saw a man standing here, wearing a black hat and a blue jacket. I saw a puff of smoke, and I thought it was a cigarette, but it wasn't. He had a gun, and he walked towards the railroad. He tossed the gun to the second man. Then he turned and straightened his jacket, adjusted his hat, and walked casually away. The man with the striped shirt, the railroad shirt, walked over to the electrical box with the gun. He took the gun apart. He put it in a toolbox. He then walked slowly away. in the direction of the railroad track. When the motorcade passed by below me here, I realized that Kennedy had been shot. I was horrified. I saw a policeman standing on the railroad bridge, and I tried to get his attention, but he didn't see me. So I got in my car and drove to the area where I had seen the two men. But there were so many people there, and I couldn't find them.
Okay, so the man that Ed Hoffman saw, the men that he saw were David Ferrie, who was the first shooter on the Knoll, and the man in the railroad uniform. When you put when you actually go over the documents and you come to understand who's who and what was what, you'll come to understand that that was Andrew Jerome Blackman, who was the railroad man. But we'll talk about him another time. So Ed Hoffman is down here on the edge of the Stemmons Freeway, and he sees David Ferrie, where I have him located as a star. David Ferrie will then walk casually, like Ed Hoffman said, over to the pergola where he's photographed, and then back into the railroad yards. So this is the first shot of David Ferrie, which is seconds after the assassination. He walks off, and he's captured there on the right-hand side on top of the pergola, and he's talking to looks like a blonde woman. Next, David Ferrie will cross through the railroad yards where he's photographed here. The black hat with the wide felt band clearly visible. And when you compare that picture to David Ferrie, a known picture of David Ferrie wearing that same damn suit, it's clearly him, right? You don't even have to see all the minute details because that is clearly David Ferrie with the same hat and the only suit he owned, a dark blue suit. And when you compare the description of the hat worn by the man who shot from the fence, as per Ed Hoffman, it's a match to David Ferrie's hat, okay? This is not rocket science. Also in Dealey Plaza, Leighton Martins and Alvin Beaubouf, okay? This is before the alleged trip to the Winterland happened, right? So what does that mean? It means that somebody drove them in Dave Ferrie's 61 Comet station wagon from Dallas down to Houston, okay? Completely debunks the idea that they left on the November 22nd from New Orleans, drove through all these places, and then get to the Alamo Motel at 4:30 in the morning. No. They drove down from Dallas, and the person who drove them was undoubtedly Sergio Arcacha. Undoubtedly. Matches the description, was in Dallas, shooter on the roof of the depository, and as he makes his escape in David Ferrie's car, he takes these guys on their alibi trip. All right, so now we're going to play this clip from Velma, who observes David Ferrie behind the book depository, sitting in Carl Mather's gray Plymouth.
Let's go to our final caller with you, Alex. First-time caller. Hi there.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
I am Velma, and I live 100 miles from Dallas. I was living in Dallas at the time, and I had my car parked behind that Texas Depository book building.
Yes, sir.
I saw the shooter came out, and he had a very high-powered rifle. It was no bolt action, and
well, now, and let me ask you, please, because that rifle that they said Oswald used to kill Kennedy was apparently left upstairs.
It was.
You're saying you saw someone else come out with a high-powered rifle. Okay, tell me what happened then.
Okay, I'm sitting in my car, and there's a gray, dove-colored old one-seated Plymouth car sitting there, and there's a man with a felt hat on with a wide band, and he had on a suit, and he had black hair and real heavy eyebrows, and he'd look at me kind of dirty. Well, about that time, a police car come and told this man to move, and he didn't move right away, and the police got out of his car, and I know later it was Tippett, and he told him, he said, I said move that car. Well, then, this man that's in this old gray car, he went straight on around and went around this big building that was across the street from me. Tippett went the other way, so they must have met back there.
Did you say this to the Warren Commission, ma'am, or anybody else?
I haven't told anybody. because I didn't want. I had 4 children I was having to support then, and I didn't want to get shot. And I saw the man, and I could tell you how he's dressed.
All right, I want you.
From there, David Ferrie will go to the Tippit shooting, where he's involved with the assassination of J.D. Tippit. And like I said, from there, he will then go to a house, swap vehicles, and then drive the Ford Falcon station wagon, light blue, directly to Hammond, Louisiana, while Sergio Arcacha takes them to Houston to go to the Winterland. Now, let's talk about the Winterland, because this is an entirely other rabbit hole. This is a patch from the Winterland Ice Arena, confirming the name. This is a photograph of the Winterland from the 1970s. And this here on the right is Richard Rowland. He is allegedly the son of Chuck Rowland and a woman named Joyce Rowland, which we'll get to here shortly. It says here the Winterland, Houston's only ice arena. And when it says expires in 67. So here's the thing. David Ferrie said he went to the Bel Air skating rink and looked around for like an hour, couldn't find the owner, right? Well, there is no Bel Air skating rink at all. The Bel Air skating rink was knocked down in 1959. So what does that imply about David Ferrie? David Ferrie gave the name of a skating rink, the Bel Air, that hadn't been open in 4 years. How would he know that name? How would he know to give that as an alibi? Well, how I see it is he was obviously making runs to Houston to the Bel Air skating rink for years prior to this incident, and that's why he gave that name. But the Winterland it says here, Houston's only ice arena. So Ferrie allegedly meets with Chuck Rowland at the Winterland, right? Have you ever met anybody named Rowland? I sure haven't. So, but the thing is, that's not his real name. His real name is Rulon Rowland, Rulon. Rulon Chuck Rowland, okay? So I've also read some other things about this guy that turned out to be not true. He's half Korean. That's true. He is supposedly... Chuck Rowland was a professional ice skater, and I had read that he was a French Canadian, but he's not a French Canadian. He was born in America. In researching Rulon Rowland, he claims to have been a professional ice skater, and I find some information on him being a professional ice skater. Here he's helping out a group in 1950 called the Skating Shrams. So interesting, right? Just a little bit of Americana there for you. But when after reading that he was a French Canadian, I did my research, and the 1930 census shows that he was born in Idaho to Charles Rowland and Virginia Rowland. And then in the 1940 census, he's moved to Salt Lake City. So he was never a French Canadian. That's a misnomer. So at the Clay Shaw trial, they ask him, what's your connection with the business? He's like, I've been connected with ice rinks and ice business since 46. Are you a professional skater? Yes, sir. But then I do more research on him, and turns out that in 1955 in Houston, he was an accountant for the Electrotechnical Laboratories on Alabama Avenue, and married to Joyce. And in 58, he's the manager of Doghouse Packaging Company. So I don't know what to make of this. I don't know how you're a professional ice skater, but you're working as an accountant and as a packing house manager. So there's obfuscation here going on somewhere. In 1983, he gets divorced from Joyce Rowland. And in 2018, he died. Rulon Rowland obituary. And so why does everybody call him Rowland? And why did the FBI allow him to swear himself in and give the name Rowland, Chuck Rowland? I don't know. Why did they try to hide this? I don't know. But Rowland is not his name. Now, the Winterland was started by a couple, Mary Boots Roberts and Ronnie Roberts. They were touring ice skaters. They were very professional. They were in Ice Follies. They did some work with Disney on ice. They did all kinds of stuff. At the time, they were very well-known ice skaters. So let's go over Mary Boots Roberts' white obituary. So I can't figure out the white part, right? I've gone over this lady's life with a fine-tooth comb. I don't know where the white comes from. Mary Boots Roberts, white. She didn't marry a guy named White. There's no White anywhere in her entire existence, and neither of those were her birth name. Well, let's get to that. Mary Boots Roberts White passed away Saturday, the 29th of November. Beloved mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother and friend. She accomplished much in her life, became a professional ice skater, and worked for NASA during the Apollo and Gemini missions. Let me make this really clear. I spent a lot of time digging through documents and all kinds of books and everything on the Apollo and Gemini missions. I can find not a single reference to a Mary Boots Roberts or a Mary Boots White or a Mary White or a Mary whatever. Okay? At all. It's a front. She didn't work for NASA. It's a front. She's a spy. All right. So she owned several businesses and became an inspiration to many. She is preceded in death by her parents, Joe and Corinne Caltagirone, and her brother, Joe Caltagirone Jr. That's very important. Her birth name is Caltagirone. Husband and skating partner Ronnie Roberts, sons Ronald Anthony and Roland George Roberts. She is survived by her son Greg Roberts and wife Ann, daughter Rhonda Shook, and husband, and I don't need to go through the rest of that stuff. The big thing here is that she worked for NASA, but I can't find any proof she ever worked for NASA at all. And she has her last name was Caltagirone. These are the two things that you need to get out of this. Now, Mary Boots Roberts, she had a first cousin, by the name of Vincent Caltagirone Jr., okay? Let me read some of this. After graduating from St. Thomas High School in 1943, Vincent attended Texas A&M University, followed by an enlistment in the U.S. Navy. Upon discharge, he received his bachelor's degree from the University of Houston, followed by 35 years in the insurance business. That is blatantly false. Vincent was a board member of the National YMCA Scuba Program. One of Vincent's recreational diversions was teaching scuba at the downtown Houston YMCA. Vincent was a member of the St. Vincent de Paul Catholic Church, as well as the Sacred Heart Society of Little York. Vincent is preceded in death by his father, Vincent T. Caltagirone Sr., and his mother, Carolyn Caltagirone. He's survived by his wife of 50 years, Roberta Bobby Caltagirone, sons Tom Caltagirone, and wife Lou Caltagirone, and Jack Caltagirone, who's the grandson. Okay? We'll just stop right there. That's the most important stuff. So, when I'm doing my initial research, and this was back in like 2018, 2019, when I originally came across all this stuff. So I had done all this research on the Winterland, and this name Caltagirone had popped up. But the name Caltagirone popped up again later. And I'm like, what? Wait a minute. I was like, I know this name. Why do I know this name? Right? And so, let me read you this. It just so happened that I had moved on to Jack Valenti, and I was studying Jack Valenti, and he had a sister named Lorraine Valenti Dinerstein. And let me go ahead and read this. Lorraine was preceded in death by her loving husband, Ted Dinerstein, her brother, Jack Valenti, and his wife, Mary Margaret Valenti, so it's the right Valentis, and her parents. She is survived by her son, Tom Caltagirone, and his wife, Lou, and her son, Jack Caltagirone. Okay, and I'm like, at this point, I'm having a conniption, right? I'm freaking out. I'm like, what the hell is going on here? So, I come across this FBI document, and this is in the Jack Valenti file, right? And so it has a section here where it's listing Jack's known relatives, and it lists his mother and his father. And then for some reason, they redacted the name of his sister, but it's obvious that who it was. It was Lorraine Valenti Dinerstein, age 38, all of Houston, okay? Because that was the only immediate family, his only sister. And there was a line drawn from Lorraine's name to the column, and the name Vincent was on there, okay? So the FBI was aware of Vincent somehow, right? And so here we go. Since they obviously had the same kids, they had to have been married, right? And so what did I do? I find the marriage certificate between Vincent Thomas Caltagirone Jr. and Lorraine Bernadine Valenti, Jack Valenti's sister, right? So this is unbelievable. So the idea that Vincent Caltagirone Jr., who's married to Jack Valenti's sister, right? Basically what that means is Jack Valenti married into the family of Mary Boots Roberts. Okay, so let me move on to the next page. This is a post from Richard Rowland, and Richard Rowland is allegedly the son of Joyce Rowland. Okay, And he goes, this is on Facebook in a private group that I was given access to. And it says here, this is my mom, Joyce Rowland. I saw some previous posts where there were questions about who owned the Winterland ice rink. Her recollection is that the Johnson family built the building at the rink. They owned the multi-story building across the street that fronted Kirby and other real estate throughout Houston. Their motivation was from Ronnie and Boots Roberts. Ronnie and Boots owned or managed ice skating studio in the center where the Western Kitchen was. It was from there they talked to the Johnsons about building a full-size rink. Okay? So the Johnson family enterprise, Lyndon Baines Johnson, owned the Winterland. And it was built with a partnership between Mary Boots Roberts, Ronnie Roberts, and Lyndon Johnson. Okay? Ronnie and Boots owned or managed ice skating studios in the center where the Western Kitchen was. It was from there they talked to the Johnsons about building a full-size rink. This is where it gets very questionable. Something didn't go well with the Roberts, and my parents, Joyce and Chuck Rowland, became the tenants of the building and managed the rink for many years. She's unclear why they gave it up, but my dad went into another business called Landia of Houston. My sister Rulona and Tammy both became professional ice skaters and traveled the world with Holiday on Ice and Ice Capades. Rulona won a world professional championship during that time period. So that's the most important stuff here. So what is it that we actually have? We've got Lyndon Johnson and the Johnson family enterprise own the Winterland. Okay. It is leased to Mary Caltagarone, who is Mary Boots Roberts, right? She has a brother named Joseph Jr., father's Joseph Sr., and her cousin is Vincent Caltagarone Jr. Okay. Vincent Caltagarone Jr. was married to Lorraine Valenti Dinerstein, who became Dinerstein later, but to Lorraine Valenti from 1950 until 1961. 11 years they were married. Okay. And then Lorraine's the sister of Jack Valenti, who was the right-hand man of Lyndon Johnson. So we have this closed loop of interaction between four people. We have four people who knew each other intimately. We've got Jack Valenti, Lyndon Johnson, Mary Boots Roberts, and her cousin, Vincent Caltagarone. All four of these people know each other. I have to emphasize this. All four of these people know each other. Lyndon Johnson to Vincent and Jack and Mary Boots Roberts. All right, so now here's where it gets good. We're back to the Alamo Motel registration stuff, right? So the phone calls that were made, to the Town and Country and to G. Ray Gill. WSHO Radio, owned by Hank Greenspun at the time. There's a great story behind WSHO and how it was acquired by Hank Greenspun. And then WDSH, like I said, WDSU, it's actually television. The connect there would be Walter Sheridan to Kerry Thornley. And they made one local call, and that local call went unidentified. All right? Unidentified. Well, that number just so happened to come back to another skating rink called the Gateway Swim and Skate. I believe this was a roller skating rink, though not an ice skating rink. So the Gateway Swim and Skate. Let me read this to you now. This is from the Houston Architecture Forum. This was a random post from somebody from 2011. It said the Gateway Pool opened in 1959. Okay, so let me clarify the Bel Air. Remember Dave Ferrie said he went to the Bel Air skating rink? The Bel Air was knocked down in 59, and the Gateway was built on top of it. And it was a pool and a roller skating rink, and it had a whole bunch of stuff there, right? The Gateway Pool opened in 59. I was 10 at the time, and they had this huge grand opening, and my parents bought me a season pass. Our house backed up close to it. I would ride my bike through the vacant lot next to our house, and it was just on the other side of the Alamo Motel. Okay? The Gateway that they're calling from the Alamo is directly next to the hotel, right? So the hotel and the Gateway Pool are directly next to each other. So they go and they stay at the Alamo Motel, and then they call the Gateway from there. Why are they doing that? Why would they be calling the Gateway? Well, let's go back to Vincent Caltagarone Jr.'s obituary. And it says all the stuff about the YMCA scuba program. It says one of Vincent's recreational diversions was teaching scuba at the Houston downtown YMCA. Okay? It was shortly after the Gateway opened, within a couple years, that the Gateway became the downtown Houston YMCA. Okay? So, duh. They were obviously staying at the Alamo Motel and calling the Gateway. Why? I really don't know, but it has something to do with Vincent Caltagarone Jr., who worked there. Now, by my own calculations, Vincent Caltagarone Jr. is the short tramp. Now, if you look at the picture on the right, this has been clearly tampered with. Look at those eyes. Those are not natural eyes. Nobody's eyes squint or close that way. This is obvious obfuscation. The picture on the left is Vincent taken about 10 or 15 years prior to the date of the assassination. But look at every single small detail. Look at the chin. Look at the nose. The nose is the dead giveaway. That's a very uniquely shaped nose, okay? The hairline is more receded on the right. The earlobes, you can tell he's got those weird earlobes that kind of look separate from the rest of the ear. Vincent Calderon Jr. was the short tramp. And not only was he the short tramp, he was identified by James Earl Ray as having been the real Raoul. All right, so let me continue this investigation. Let's connect the dots here on Raoul Jack Valenti and Vincent Calderon Jr., okay, because this becomes extremely important. Interview of Glenda Grabo by James Douglas. So Glenda says, Raoul's like Jekyll and Hyde, real nice, and then he'd blow up. Jim says, different from the man you once knew, who was a friend to you in the early years. Yes, like a Jekyll and Hyde. They're two different people. That's like when I talked to him on the phone for 6 minutes. Now, when was this? A couple of years ago. How did you come to talk to Raoul on the telephone a couple of years ago? I called information and got the number, but the investigators didn't want me talking to him. They just wanted me to go through them. Why did you telephone Raoul? I cut that out and just went to the next one because it wasn't important. Where is Raoul living now? New York. Did he acknowledge on the phone that he knew you? Yes, he called me Olinda. That's the way he always pronounced her name. That was said by Roy, who's her husband. Glenda then says, I asked him if he'd seen Lyndon Johnson's one-time speechwriter, Jack Valenti. And he said, hey, I haven't seen him in a long time. And then Jim asks, so Jack Valenti knew Raoul? Glenda says, yes. And then Roy said, she'd drive Raoul to the Alabama Theater in Houston. And Glenda says, that's where Jack Valenti was at. Okay, we don't have a year here. We don't. But we have a definitive connection between Raoul and Jack Valenti, right? So here we have this confirmation. And this I found after I had made the determination that Vincent Calderon Jr. was Raoul, okay? So Raoul being the short tramp and then identified by James Earl Ray as having been the real Raoul. And so then we find out that Jack Valenti is his former brother-in-law. This is like a perfect closed circuit of interaction here, right? And this connects to the Gateway Swim and Skate because that's where he was working. That's where Vincent was working. Vincent was working at the Gateway that became the downtown Houston YMCA where he taught scuba lessons. So the entire trip really had very little to do with the Winterland. It had more to do with the Gateway. And why? Well, obviously, Vincent lives in Houston. Vincent being the short tramp, he had to get down there somehow. And by my calculations, he either caught a ride with the guys back to Houston or he found some other way there. But when they get there, when Arcacha and the boys get there, they're clearly attempting to get a hold of Vincent Calderon Jr. That's why they went to the Gateway. That's why they called the Gateway. The whole trip to Houston revolves around Vincent Calderon Jr. Right? So then Jim asks Glenda Grabo, do you think Jack Valenti knows Raoul's connection with the King assassination? And Glenda says, sure. And of course he would. Of course he would. Do I think Jack Valenti shot Martin Luther King? I think there's a goddamn good possibility. That needs to be explored. 100%. I'll tell you this much, though. One thing you'll never see in any book on Martin Luther King, but that you'll find if you clip the newspaper articles from like the day of and the day after Martin Luther King was killed. Right outside that boarding house that was involved in the Martin Luther King assassination, across from the motel, the one that backed up to it where allegedly the shot came from. Immediately after the assassination, the FBI picked up a short, balding white man and drove him to a federal building. And that's all we know. I have the clipping of that newspaper article. I guarantee you that short, balding white man was either Vincent or Jack. One of the two. But like I said, that needs much more exploration. All right, now let's make some more connections here with Vincent and connect him to the Raoul character, okay? So Percy Foreman's a Houston-based lawyer. He's a CIA lawyer. Like, anytime the CIA needs something, they go to Percy Foreman, okay? Jim asks, how did you meet Percy Foreman? Glenda says he was just a lawyer in Houston. Roy's brother got into trouble one time, and he used Percy Foreman as his attorney. We never knew he'd been Ray's attorney. We never paid no attention to that. I was raising kids when that happened. So we went up to Foreman's office to help Roy's brother. Foreman was there. How did Foreman's connection with James Earl Ray come up? Oh, he had books and all kinds of stuff about Ray in there. I got to talk to him about it and about Raoul. How did he respond to your telling him about Raoul killing Martin Luther King? He said he knew Raoul. And then Jim says, Percy Foreman, James Earl Ray's lawyer, knew Raoul? And he asked, what was his attitude towards Ray? I don't think I clipped anything beyond that. But so here we have the connection between Percy Foreman and Raoul, right? And he says he knows Raoul. Well, how does he know Raoul? Well, because in 1966, Vincent Caltagirone Jr., a.k.a. Raoul, a.k.a. the Short Tramp, will be dragged into the murder trial of a guy named Jacques Mosler. Jacques Mosler was this flamboyant millionaire down in Miami. And in I think it was 1966, he was stabbed to death in his house, like 200 stab wounds or something over the top like that. I mean, it was ridiculous. He was found in a pool of blood. And then halfway through the trial of Mosler, it is uncovered that Vincent Caltagirone Jr., who at this time is allegedly supposed to be an insurance professional, okay, is actually Jacques Mosler's roommate, and he's working at one of Jacques Mosler's banks in Miami as an assistant teller, okay? So Vincent's whole life story about being an insurance professional is bullshit. He was the Short Tramp. He was Raoul, and he most certainly was involved with this murder of Jacques Mosler. And why is this important? Because when Vincent gets called into court, Percy Foreman is his lawyer, okay? Another closed circuit here, right? And so let me see. I think we're about to wrap this thing up here pretty soon. Okay, and here's the last slide that I have. When I took the pictures of Joyce Rowland, who was supposed to be the owner of the Winterland in 1963, or the person who was running it at the time, who was married to Roland Rowland, a.k.a. Chuck Rowland, and Mary Boots Roberts, who was the original founder of the Winterland, right, who allegedly hadn't been there. She had left, and then the Rowlands take over. Well, looking at these pictures, it's clear as day this is the same woman. The big giveaway here is the double turkey neck. And if you look at the lines on the face are identical. The ridges above the brow are identical. And the hair, the way it waves is identical. The picture on the left looks like it's a much older picture, like she's an older woman in that photograph. But clear as day, that's the same woman. So I have no idea what's going on here because I started to dig into the lives of Mary Boots Roberts and Joyce Rowland. And there are two very distinct entire life stories for each of these women. So I don't know what the hell is up with this, but this needs much more explanation than we actually have. So, and that's going to do it for me today, guys. That wraps up what really happened with the Winterland, what really happened with the shot that came from the Knoll that struck Kennedy in the throat, David Ferrie and his boys, clearly in Dallas, and Melvin Coffey. He got dragged into this and his name used as an alibi for Leighton Martins. I don't know why, for Leighton Martins. I don't know why they tried to hide the fact that Leighton Martins went on this trip, but they did. So now what I'm going to do, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for the presentation, but I'm going to let this play out, and I am going to run through some true Americana here with some paraphernalia, I guess you'd call it, from the Winterland Ice Arena. Thank you, everybody.